All right. I am so happy to welcome back to the program. We have special guest Tara Aal with us again. Thank you for joining me, Tara.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's been a hot second since Tara's been on the program. She joined me for Libra season 2021, which seems like a few days ago, but now I'm like, oh, that's like well over a year ago. What's going on here? But we had an excellent conversation. I remember how I feel like we got off the call and we were like, I feel like we were both in a stage of like enlightenment with what was coming.
Yeah, it
No,
was
that
awesome. I always feel it's always my favorite when you think you're going to be talking about something for someone else and you get done and you're like, oh, there's so much of that was just for myself. So I think I felt that way about it. So it was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, one of the reasons why I do this forecast, spoiler alert, people, it's their selfish motives. Like it's fun I was just talking to this about Tara before we got on the recording about how one of the reasons I do the podcast is I just love talking with other people about astrology and especially forecast style, because there is this kind of like it becomes its own creative process, in the process of talking about what the potentialities are in a way that it's just, I mean, I can only have this much vision about it, but bringing someone else's vision in and then ping ponging in pure Gemini style of back and forth, like it just breeds its own thing. And so it's wonderful. So I'm so glad to have you back. And so for people that have not heard of Tara before or caught our previous podcast, let the listeners know a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a writer, astrologer, tarot reader. I'm currently in Los Angeles, but I'm from Seattle area. And I have been practicing for about almost 12 years. So just over the decade mark, which is exciting. That feels like it just went in the, like, I don't know, a snap, but here we are. I co-authored a book, Astrology by Moonlight, that came out just about 1 year old now. And I do see clients and teach, but my main gig is I'm the resident astrologer for Sage Goddess. So that's me. And that's what I do. And evolutionary astrology is my base, but I am very non-denominational in the sense that, like, I am very happy to pick and take from all the things that are so helpful. So yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations on the book, because I remember when we talked, you were giving us a hint that it was coming out soon, and here it is, full-fledged. You said it just turned one.
Yeah.
It's just had its first birthday.
Yes.
That's great. So, what's the name of the book one more time?
Astrology by Moonlight, and the publisher is Llewellyn. Yeah.
Perfect.
And it's about the moon, but it's also about the moon and phasal relationship with each planet. So it's kind of taking a journey through your own moon planet phases in your birth chart, or any other way you can apply it. But that was our aim, was to kind of take a deep dive into the moon.
I love it. If there's one thing, it's probably one of the most important planets. Well, it's kind of a planet. It's a planet in our mind. In the chart, and this could be Cancer talk speaking, but it's like we are ruled by it, literally. Even if you're ruled by another planet, you are ruled by your moon to some extent.
I 100% agree. I'm a Cancer, so I have to disclose that, but I definitely agree. Yeah. Yeah, it's the most personal part. And I feel like if you can be at home, which is a good moon word, if you can be at home in that part of yourself, it for me, it helps everything flow. So going back to that core center, it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a Capricorn moon, I need a little help there. Need a little help. I'm just trying to get to that core center, feeling all right about it. But I think that's right. I forgot, Tara, that you're a Cancer too.
Yeah.
We got two Cancers
Yeah.
in the house today. Yeah. So, well, that'd be interesting to think about two Cancers talking about Aquarius season, because Aquarius season, this is not, we can't see it technically. Our sun cannot see Aquarius. So,
yep, that quincunx is in full action.
Yeah. So let's see what we come up with. And maybe because of that little blind spot, so to speak, there could be a whole nother way of looking at it. So I'm excited to talk to you about Aquarius season here, 2020. It says 2022 in my notes, but Can't go back in time. Better change that. 2023. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
doesn't quite have the ring, it doesn't have the same
No,
ring as 2022, but
no.
here we are. So Aquarius season, it's going to start very shortly here. We're actually recording this just a few days before it starts. In the soup that is known as Mars stationing direct, and Mercury about to station tomorrow as Tara and I talk here today. But the Aquarius ingress happens on Friday, January 20th. And so before we get into our full on deep dive of the transits, let's break down a little bit about Aquarius season and its energy just in general. So, we're talking about fixed air here. We've got a lot of experience with Aquarius in the last couple of years. Thinking about Saturn being an Aquarius, and really Saturn is getting to the end of its Aquarius transit here, and especially in Aquarius season. And of course, we just got out, or we're ending Capricorn season right now too. So there is this back-to-back Saturnian focus that is at play. So just more Saturn coming in, gotta love some Saturn. But Tara, what's your initial impressions of Aquarius energy, and just as energy itself, but also this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I just did a lecture on fixed signs, like fixed signs in general, kind of in my mind, even before I dial in just to Aquarius. I think that in my old school class times with Laura Nalbandian, she would really talk about how VMP, value, meaning, and purpose, right? That's what fixed signs want, value, meaning, and purpose. And they're always looking to find value, meaning, and purpose for what was initiated in the prior cardinal sign. So for me, you just kind of teed this up perfectly. What does it mean to move from something that's initiated in Capricorn and then into the next stage of actually saying, value, meaning, and purpose, but also what can we do with it? And part of that energy is about figuring out what works and what doesn't work, right? So, and I mean, it's no news to anybody, right, that Aquarius is very much about progression, right? Moving things forward or getting things unstuck. But it's interesting that it's also a fixed sign. Like I find it's funny of myself even saying that, because part of its job is to also hold things in concentrated energy, right? So in some ways, I think of it as almost having to do two things at the same time, right? With Aquarius. And I also think of it as fixed air being like the eye of the hurricane. I think, years ago, John Chinworth and I, who's another astrologer, he and I kind of geeked out on sort of what would be the elemental image if you go through each of the signs, right? And if you think about the eye of the hurricane, it's like, where is that still spot, or where can you sort of find that space of agency inside things that are whirling or moving? So, I mean, that's initially, but of course, always at the core with Aquarius for me always feels like change, right? And I feel that in myself right now, just in general, to your point about what do I feel kind of collectively right now, change. But as you and I were talking about before, almost the crucible before the change. Like, I don't know that Aquarius season is going to be when we leap off the edge or when we fully get out of the box, to use, kind of old terminology, but we certainly will have new, I guess, energy rising up around what doesn't work. And that's part of what I'm kind of feeling into. What's stuck, right? Even though it's a fixed sign, what's stuck and needs to be unstuck so we can build something more stable. I guess is my initial take on it.
Yeah, it really has a reform quality to it. Aquarius does. And Lord knows we've had some time to look at what's stuck and what's not working in our lives. Mars has gone retrograde for quite some time, not in Aquarius, of course, but just having Mars and Mercury being retrograde, and having gone through just, the potent Saturn and Uranus tension that's been happening the last couple years. It's like, it feels like there's nothing necessarily totally new that's coming to that table. But if we were looking for that pulled back perspective and that kind of like airy detachment that Aquarius can give us, because a lot of times the only way to solve problems in life is to get a distance from it. Right. And so I think that Aquarius does give us that distance, which is good, like it's kind of like that eagle eye, that bird's eye view. And you can kind of think about, big picture being more of a Jupiterian or Sagittarius thing. But I think Aquarius definitely lends itself to that as well. And especially when we think about the actual representative of Aquarius, which is this water bearer. Everybody thinks that Aquarius isn't that a water sign? You're like, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, kind of. I mean, there is a water quality. There's this idea of taking, the more humane thought and then like dispersing it, and spreading it, dripping it
Yeah.
down and raining it among
Yeah.
all, there. So, I like that. I like that. I feel like it's the precursor, as you just mentioned, we're talking about this precursor of this interesting in between
Mm.
spot before we get this like super action that's going to be happening, especially once
Mhm.
Aries season gets here.
Yep.
But yeah, Aquarius season might not have like all the juicy bits, and but it is a crucial component, I think, to what the year has in store.
And yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking like the Capricorn sometimes, it pushes and pushes for things. I mean, I mean, I have Capricorn in the midheaven, so like I have my own experience with that. It's like I got to do it. I'm gotta get up that hill or get up that mountain, or I got to keep working at it. And I think that Aquarius, it's funny because both Capricorn and Aquarius can have very broad view, right? So I think oftentimes Capricorn brings objectivity, but I feel like when you're pushing hard to get somewhere, sometimes you can't drop the load enough to actually step back and expand. And so that's when I feel it in my body. I kind of feel the difference of push, push, push versus all of a sudden a little bit of the, I guess, the ease or the levity of being able to step back and then ask the question, is it worth it? Because I think that's a big part of it. And you know how Capricorn sometimes like it just doesn't want to give up or doesn't want to give in. And so we keep on pushing for the thing. Aquarius is more comfortable breaking with stuff, right? So it's still Saturn if we want to think about traditional rulers, which I do. I work with co-rulers, but it's a different version. It's like, it's weird. Do you ever think about this, like the stability that comes from some instability, right?
I feel like that's like the mode of
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah. But yeah.
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 Absolutely. I mean, that's the idea of like the whole, reform or like revising something or making something better, is that it can't be stable forever. Like
Yep.
there's no progress,
Yep.
there's no invention if
Mhm.
if something is like runs the
Mm.
course of stability forever. So there is this kind of destabilizing process that happens. And yeah. So, and of course, we can bring kind of that Uranian component in, especially if you're thinking about
Mhm.
co-ruler involvement, because
Yeah.
Uranus is that planet that is all about, the great awakening and sudden change and shifts, that come in. And then how do we stabilize that, right?
Yeah.
And, there's this idea too, when you're talking about the pushing of the Capricorn Saturn versus the, like maybe the more detached overview of the more like framework and blueprinting
Mhm.
of Aquarius, because, Capricorn's pushing because it wants results. I mean, it's the earth
Yep.
sign. It's like,
Oh yeah.
show me. I want to see, I want to make up the walls, but Aquarius, this to me is more of like a construct that is based in ideals,
Mm.
rather than the actual like result right away,
Yeah.
which it's interesting when we think about, to bring back the whole progression of it, how does one
Yeah.
lead into
Yeah.
another. I think one thing I really felt aligned with the old Capricorn to Aquarius piece was one time I heard Bill Maher, who's like a comedian, talks
Mm.
piece. He just said something where he said shame, he's like saying that shame is needed because shame, like public shame, leads to reform. And I
Oh.
was always like, you know what,
Oh.
there's a good piece in that, because, and that's not even just in the public and the collective
Yeah.
life, that's in our own life, when because shame is not totally, I mean, it can have its downers where we don't need to
Mm.
have shame involved, and you want to release
Mhm.
that, of course, but sometimes I think that a healthy shame is
Yeah.
what leads us to be better people, and make better choices and construct our life in better ways.
Yeah. Do you
So,
remember reading? I was poking around on something Dane Rudhyar, and I wasn't even looking for this, but I came across the part where I think it's in the Pulse of Life under Aquarius. I was looking at Aquarius for something, but he was talking about how there are, two of the fixed signs are what he calls solstitial release of power, and two of them are equinoctial, right? Depending on whether they come after the equinox or the solstice. And
mhm.
he was talking about the ones that come after the solstice. So Aquarius is one of those, right? Coming after Capricorn, that it actually has to have sort of like this outburst of power. So the fixed energy, instead of drawing in with the yin fixed signs, it actually has to push out, because Capricorn and Cancer can both polarize so much, in the sense of like Capricorn can be so focused on the social image or so focused on it that it's interesting to think, we often think fixed, pulling in, condensing, but he talks about almost like this punching out to create that space. And it kind of gave me this whole new sort of perspective on, wow, that is a lot of what is happening with Aquarius. And that's why sometimes it seems so radical, right? It's literally having to have this like outburst of energy that's become, too defined or too rigid in its way. Now we know in its own way it can become rigid too. That's why I always like
Yeah.
pull back and say, well, we all know that there's Aquarius energy that, once it gets fixed in its ways, it's just as rigid as the thing it's trying to overcome. But that's kind
Yeah.
of like all energy, I feel like, really. But yeah.
That is true. There's polarities to everything. And at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's a fixed sign. It
Yep.
is a fixed sign. So what's it fixated on?
Mhm.
Is it
Yes, good point.
fixated on what can
Yeah.
change and what can evolve, or is it
Yeah.
fixated on, keeping something that it's deemed as the best option or the
Yeah.
way to go, like it has
Yeah.
proven results. And so why reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
like kind of thing. And so it can go either way. And sometimes that is needed. Sometimes change is pushed for that, it doesn't need to be improved
Yeah.
upon, or that's why it's always, I remember having Wade Caves on the program some time
Mm.
ago. And I think we were talking about when Saturn moved into Aquarius. That was the
Mm.
actual episode. And he kind of was like, you got to be very conscious of what the change it is that you're pushing for, because ideals can get um can drive you so much that you don't see the bigger consequences that are
Mm.
on the horizon from disrupting. Yeah, it's like it's hard.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
a double-edged sword a little bit there.
It is.
So that's something to think about when we talk about Aquarius season. And when you said the Aquarius season comes into mind, change comes into mind, that was
Mm.
when like a little part of me was like, I wonder if that's our Cancer, aversion perspective, just because it's the eighth house placement from Cancer. And so there is that, all you Cancer risings out there, Cancer suns, you might feel Aquarius is definitely a place that challenges some sort of transition in life.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is that Uranian piece to it that
But there
comes
can
into
also
play.
be I don't know if harsh is the right word, but compared to the Cancer energy, if we just play on that for a second, right, that it kind of likes things to be more, wants to feel like it's taken care of, and there's a certain personal approach, right? And there is when I say harsh, I just mean simply a kind of a realistic stepping back of what really needs to be handled, what's really going on. It doesn't cater so much to that tender kind of sensitive side of Cancer. So that sense of sort of being, whoa, maybe we can understand that this is ABC is better for everybody, but it's very hard sometimes for Cancer to take that personally. So one of my things I learned so much from Aquarius is how to not take it personally. Like, it's a gift to watch someone who can really work with that energy in a healthy way and still have humanity, right? Because of course it can go too far on the side of losing
Yeah.
sight of that. But yeah, so of course the change is not only is the change scary, but it's going to be change, and no one's going to care if I'm sad or hurting or left
No one
behind. Yeah,
cares about how I feel within it
exactly.
all.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. Well, Saturn has not cared how we feel for
No.
quite some time.
Yes. Yes, I'm well aware. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, we are reaching the end of that Saturn and Aquarius
Mm.
transit. Saturn and Pisces is going to be a whole nother beast.
Mhm.
That is definitely going to be a big change in its own right.
Yeah.
And that is that is an episode to come, of course. But for now, we're really fixated on these last degrees of Saturn being in Aquarius,
Mhm.
because there's, we have just to give a lunar overview of the season, we have our new moon in Aquarius, which is almost immediate after the ingress,
Yep.
like the day after, pretty much. And Venus happens to be conjunct Saturn there, so we'll definitely talk about what that new moon has in store. But then we have it's almost like one more lighting of the Saturn Uranus square to some extent. I mean, they are very much separating, but we have a full moon that is going to be square Uranus and lighting up, the midpoint of eclipse seasons too. So that's another big part of the Aquarius season, is that it's kind of midpoint of eclipses. We also have fixed quarters. So to bring back, Tara, what was it that you said with the meaning, what's
value, meaning, and purpose.
Value, meaning, and purpose. I love that, because when we think about all the lunar cycle and fixed quarters, we can, if you can keep those three words in your mind,
that's right,
as you make decisions from each point, I think that would be a solid strategy.
no joke. And I looked at, I went through was writing a blog on the top astrological events for 2023, and so of the 16 that I highlighted, half of them are in fixed signs. So that adds to the whole, not even just right now, but that adds to the whole year of value, meaning, and purpose. So I was like, ooh, that's a lot of fixed energy to be paying attention to. But when we do that, I guess for all of us, whatever that means, to find that place to really ask those hard questions, right? Is what I'm doing worth it, right? Is there meaning in this particular thing, or is there not meaning in this particular thing? It really does free us up to do things that are meaningful, which to me is a big part of this Aquarius energy we're talking about, because you got to have space and you got to have energy if you're going to go and reinvent and innovate and all those things. I'm totally guilty of not making enough of that space in my life.
I have been like obsessing over making space in my life recently, because I think about like all the things that I'm trying to do. Just trying to, well, it could be the fact that Mars is stationing on my Mars in Gemini, so
yes.
which is already square Saturn in my chart. So it's like, how much do you think you really can do? But there is, that is such a Saturnian concept. There's only so much time. There's only so much energy. What are you putting it towards? And so value, meaning, and purpose, I mean, those are some pretty good keywords to back your energy up with. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I like that too, creating space. That's a good way of looking at it too. So now another thing that's going to be happening is, of course, when Aquarius season starts, Mercury will have gone direct, but we have to wait a couple more days till Uranus stations direct. But at that point, we have all planets in direct motion. It's like, it's like you feel the train start to leave the station, so to speak.
Yes. Whether or not you have a full seat or hanging off or whatever it is, it's like
you're catching it as it's going, as it's leaving the tracks. But it is that train be a rolling. And I think a lot of people are waiting for the train to roll. I know that I am to some extent. Of course, there still needs to be some weeding and that space making that we're talking about here. But, it is, there's planets be moving, and we are going forward at that time. Now, of course, Mars is going to be slowly gaining speed this whole time. It's going to take a moment for Mars to get going here, because it really doesn't leave Gemini until the end of March. So not happening this season, folks. You hang in there. Mercury still has to navigate its remaining shadow phase in Capricorn before it moves into Aquarius. And Venus at some point here will also move into Pisces, which will be nice too. So there's a lot for us to dissect. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So for those of you who are watching the video, and Tara and I can start to take a look at What's going on here? What's going on? All right. So once again, we have our ingress January 20th. It'll be about noon 30 here. Not noon 30, midnight 30, at least in San Diego, where I'm located on the Pacific coast. But we are in this interesting cycle of the season starting with a pretty rich balsamic moon that is getting ready for a new moon, which is going to happen the next day on Saturday, the 21st, when we have our new moon in Gemini. And so, what's your take on that, Tara? Just kind of the season starting in this really dark phase and immediately turning over in early degrees. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, with the, we're in this series of new moons that are all super new moons, right? Or new super moons. And I think that has some significance too, as we pull into that. But before we get to that, I don't know. I just think it adds the need to let stuff go, right? That's the balsamic phase in general, but I just think it adds, I think it's almost like a contrast, because sometimes I feel like when something's starting new, and it's also, Pluto's conjunct the sun, right?
Yeah.
Which so it's almost sometimes there's an intense maybe feeling of what we're still attached to, so we can see it clear. That's kind of how it feels to me when I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Because that's a good way of looking at it. Thinking about that crossover of Pluto before we have that new moon. I think that's the last thing that the moon does before it actually conjuncts the sun. So
but if you can feel it, this is the positive side to feeling something intense, even if it feels uncomfortable, then you can know, you can see or feel what's there, so you can make space. So, if we get extra uncomfortable, I kind of think, well, that's kind of great. How uncomfortable does it take to get us to do something different, right? Oftentimes it takes a lot, right? We can speak for ourselves, or I speak for myself. I know it's true. That's just what this feels like to me.
Yeah. And just, and really being reflective with how much change has happened. Even if you have to make change in your life, like maybe this is the dawning of the changes to come, but perhaps you have made some changes and you're sitting with that and reflecting on just the journey and, the intensity that has taken you to get to this place in your particular story. And then that seeding into sort of the new world that can be created, the new framework and the kind of the pulling back and the improvement that we were talking about with Aquarius, as just a cycle to begin with. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about that progression there of that, we just starting the season with this balsamic moon, it's basically moving light from Mercury to Pluto there, with a little stop with Neptune along the way. And so it seems like seems like an interesting little Friday, interesting reflective Friday that is going to take us to our new moon. So let me go ahead and just pull that up, because it really is pretty immediate here. So the following day on January 21st, we have our new moon, 1 degree and 32 minutes of Aquarius. Of course, some things we notice that are going on. This is, like we said, this is a Saturn, at least, if you're using traditional rulers, this is a Saturn ruled new moon. And we see Venus right here, smack dab on Saturn. So that will definitely play a piece into what's happening with this new moon. What else we got going on here? We got Mercury trining the North Node almost exactly there, and it's starting to gain speed itself. And we have Uranus, who is just about to station retrograde, or it's not retrograde. It's been retrograde, station direct. You can't see in the chart here. But it's about to happen. So what are your impressions of some of that?
And there's also a sextile to Jupiter. Did you say that? Because that's there too, to the new moon. So I think that's a nice.
Oh yeah, can't forget. Just leaving Jupiter out. I'm like, it does Jupiter about.
That's right. It says no. It's coming to the forefront. Well, I was mentioning, because I was just poking a little bit more into the astronomy, which I don't do very much, but this particular New moon. Oh, I mean, it's a super moon, so it's at perigee, which we know, but it's going to be as close to the Earth. There will not be another one that close to our planet till 2145. So I think when I think about new moon and it being as close to Earth as it's, going to be for a long time, to me, it just intensifies the energy, right?
Yeah.
Intense. So, and especially with that harmonizing with Jupiter, the ability to set new intentions and, move forward and tap into our inner vision, right? And actually start to act on that. I feel like that's a powerful cosmic helping. I mean, you know what I mean? To help us along the way a little bit. It's like an extra oomph, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, to kind of think about that transference of that that super moon that's so close to Earth there, and it
Mm-hmm.
moving from the conjunction with Pluto to fusing with the sun
Yes.
to the sextile with Jupiter. If that's
Mm-hmm.
not if that's not like a out with the old and in with the new, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse, and on both sides, because you've got help transforming the old and you've got help going forward with the new.
Yeah.
Could be
No, I love that.
unsettling though. We talked about value
Ah!
meaning. I mean, we talked about value, meaning, and purpose, and of course, Venus. One of the things that Venus is associated with value. So Saturn
Yeah.
conjunct Venus is going to really, I think, hold that energy maybe close to us, kind of like our feet to the fire around. Okay, what are you actually working for? And of course, relationships too in there, but even just at the core level, to me, Saturn and Venus together is about what's working and what's not working in all your relationships. So that's not just with people, right? But your relationship with your stuff, your relationship with your job, your relationship with life, right? What's working and what's not. And commitments, I feel, is part of this too,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we commit to? What do we not commit to?
Yeah. It feels like a whole new, yeah, there's like a fresh form of commitment. Like it's almost like you're, you know, because Saturn's so strong there, right? Because at
Yes.
the end of the day, I mean, everything is looking to Saturn still.
Mhm.
Like
Yep.
Saturn's the end of the chain here. And Saturn
Mhm.
has a very, Saturn is looking at things with a very sober view. Um, I
Oh.
like to think it still has that kind of the distance and the perspective that we're talking
Mhm.
about, thinking about the future and strategizing for the bigger, picture of things in the long term. But it does have that discernment, it feels like. And
Yeah.
so I love that. And because I feel like we talked about this on the Libra. I remember us talking about relation.
Maybe we
Well, I mean, of
should.
course, it's Libra, but just that idea of being in relation to just about anything. And I know Michael J. Morris
Yeah.
and I talked about that on the program too. And this is a great time to think about that. I'm in a relation with, my significant other, my
Yeah.
boss, my client, my that chocolate bar that I keep eating every night
Yep.
at 9 p.m. when I should
Yeah.
be eating chocolate, and so this is a great time to draw certain lines, I would think, in relation to relation and what
Yeah.
just when there's a sense of balance, just in your life in general that is aligned with these things that we're talking about of, meaning and
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
Etc. And yeah, so it feels like a turning point for a lot of relationships just in
Yep.
general. Because I mean, anytime
Yeah.
Venus and Saturn meet, this is like the conjunction
Mm.
that's like, who are you and what are you committing to for a whole year? We'll check back in next time. And last year, honestly, that was a rough situation for Venus, right? Because she was
Mm.
smack dab in between Mars and Saturn during her conjunctions there. So this
Yeah.
is a little bit of a different flavor.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're right. We may have talked about this topic partly last year, which is funny, but I always think too, Venus is just with partnerships, right? And so oftentimes when this kind of thing comes up in conversation or with a client, I'll say, especially with Saturn and Venus contacts, how are you choosing to partner with life, or are you not choosing to partner with life, right? Because every day it's a choice, right? Am I going to co-create with it? Am I part of the energy, or am I fighting against it? Am I just trying to get by? And so you can ask, I think those are important questions to ask ourselves. Right now, times are difficult, right? I mean, it's really difficult. I was talking to someone earlier today who was saying that, he really feels like that part of the reason why energy is so weird right now, it's almost like the whole pandemic time, plus all the other kind of tumultuous things we've been through, has kind of consolidated into now. It's almost like we're getting results of sort of all of it, which feels true to me just based on my own experiences in life, where some days I'll just be like, what a weird day. Do you know what I mean? Like, where is that coming from? And so I think part of this is a challenge in some ways to ask us to reconsider, how do we want to be part of this thing we call life? Or do we at all? I mean, and I don't mean that in a scary doom and gloom way, but it's a valid question.
It makes me think of a good friend of mine just sent a reel just like an hour before I got on the call with you, where it's just it's like this big gorilla who just like falls over on his back, and it's like, when when you've been saying for years, well, it is what it is, and then the cold hard reality hits you, and then the gorilla just falls, because it is. I think you're absolutely right. There is an accumulation of hardship and stress, and I honestly, that makes so much sense with Saturn reaching the end of Aquarius. It's since 2018 that it's been in back-to-back Capricorn and Saturn. We've been through a pandemic. We like right now I have extra clothing on and a heating blanket because I can't run my gas heater because natural gas is so expensive right now that I'm trying to avoid like a $400 gas bill. Like it's little things like that, the way society is structured and set up, that we're literally just feeling the weight and kind of the burden, especially within our comforts. That's a very Venus Saturn thing too. Where there are, these kind of like sacrifices to one's own comfort in relation to the larger scheme that's at work too. I mean, that's a whole nother like facet of this. Of course, I want to err on the side of like, how can we work with this and make choices for our life? But there still is that, at play. And especially when we're in these collective based signs where we are directly affected by what's around us. But maybe that's the beauty of the growth opportunities with Jupiter in Aries, is that given everything that we've been through and the constructs of society that we still have to work within, where is our agency within that? Where's the optimism? Where's the just the vital instinctual response to start anew and believe that every day is a brand new day and be willing to engage with it, I guess.
And what do you, for me, I also have a feeling about like, it's also to me, like looking at who our allies are, and maybe in some ways we've underestimated, and that can be human allies or all kinds of intelligences. I mean, I say that really broadly when I say allies, because in many ways, I mean, I know the 11th house, I think, to be more that way, but Aquarius in general, I think about that, right? Who are we? What alliances and what allies do we have? And I think in some ways we underestimate sometimes where those resources are, or we think it looks like a bestie, right? Or we think it looks like the person who we have the most affinity for, but really it may be someone that's not the case at all. But the way we can actually work together to do something differently becomes, a great alliance. So that had been on my mind too, coming into this season.
I love that. I mean, that's a big part of Aquarius as a sign. There is this social component, and this alliance and this networking and the groups and organizations that make up just camaraderie as people, but also like agencies when we think about like interacting with the different social systems that are set up. So there is that. I love that idea of the allies and the importance of like concrete bonds and making commitments to this, and like developing relationships that are on solid ground, and have this kind of like give and take that is reliable, I guess, to some extent too, when we think about Saturn there. So I love that. Ally energy for sure. It's so funny because throughout my life, like even though I'm a Cancer, all my besties, like all my like besties, they've always been Aquarius. There's always I don't know what it is, but there's always Aquarius energy that comes in there. So I love that. That's sweet. So now Uranus, what about Uranus stationing in this? Is there there feels like there is kind of that like you know, like there is this
Yeah.
like shift that comes with that too. And maybe the restlessness and the readiness of change, and you know, that the value, meaning, and purpose, and
Yep.
like especially being in Taurus, and
Yep.
how we're making decisions and moving forward with the opportunity with that Jupiter piece.
Yeah.
But
Why?
yeah.
Well, it's since it's the modern ruler of,
Yeah.
the new moon and all that stuff in Aquarius, we can,
Mhm.
give it kind of some, I guess, some equal respect for kind of how it's leading the show here. But I think in many ways for me, and I know like with the outer planets, right? We know every year they're direct for a long time, and maybe they're retrograde and direct for a long time. So it's not quite as exciting of a shift as like something, that more intermittently changes. But I always feel that when it does that, when Uranus turns direct, part of that authenticity, being authentic, moving forward in that way that's in alignment with your own natural self, that becomes extra important. It's an extra push. So I just think that adds, I guess I'm really just kind of agreeing with what you were saying before, but it adds to that push to do something different, and not just something different to be different, but to do something different that shifts you to be physically, energetically, however you want to define that, in alignment with what and who you really are. And I sometimes think of Uranus as higher mind, right? So if that's kind of what it's tapping into, sometimes I think of it as like soul mind, right? I mean, that's like kind of one way when I think about that energy. Um, but it demands not just awakening, but authenticity. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I love that because I mean, with any earth sign, essentially, there is this quality of embodiment that comes with it,
Yeah.
you know, and especially when, you know, Uranus is being governed by that Venus who's on Saturn, there is this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's kind of chaining back there.
Yeah.
And so really stepping in that role and being able to embody the ideal, embody the commitment, you know, embody the value, and maybe the hard effort and
Yeah.
long-term strategy that goes into living a life that is aligned with such things, especially if we're at a point of change. um you know, change doesn't necessarily happen overnight, especially in fixed signs.
No.
You know.
No, no, but you're so right, because with that fixed energy, I mean, which Taurus is fixed as well, right? That it's not enough to just kind of know it or think about it or have the idea, right? We have to actually be doing it. And at new moon, we don't need to know how it's going to turn out, right? It
Yeah.
really is about getting, I think that's where we can give ourselves, I guess, a little bit of a break, right? It doesn't have to be fully formulated. Here's what the stops are going to look like, and here's where it ends up. What's important is that you feel that space of, oh, this is actually more me, right? Or this is where I need more room or space, like we were saying before. This has more value, meaning, purpose to me. And you take a step, right? And that's Taurus too, right? Taurus is not racing forward, right? It is, to me, it's like solid steps in the direction that's worth it. And it's also not wasting energy, which is
Yeah.
another thing to think about, right? Because there's a tendency sometimes with, some of the other energies to like, I don't know, just, not pay attention at really how much energy it takes even to do small things. Like I always think of this example, even the energy it takes to run the old story I have in my head about what it means that we're doing right now is taking up a huge amount of my vitality. So even those little challenges of, and we're talking about all this Aquarius, right? So what's in my mind, right? What is going in my thought patterns, or where is my story taking me? And when we add this into Mercury, still kind of making its way, not, still in its shadow, part of that is how do you want to tweak the story? And do you want to keep running energy into a story that kind of keeps you stuck or keeps you doing what you've always done? So I think all of those things together is just this huge impetus to like not just take a step physically, but take a step to hold space for something different, which is always awkward, right? Because you don't know, and it's new moon, so no, you don't know.
You know, you don't know. You don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you have an inkling, but you know, you don't know. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of the new moon, right? Because we're
Mm.
talking about a cycle being set up. So everything that we're kind of you know, emphasizing at this point in time on Saturday, January 21st, is to be, you know, pieced out over,
Yeah.
you know, 28, 29 day cycle there.
Yeah.
So if you don't have it all figured out, you know, on the 21st. Don't worry. It's all part of the reconfiguration process that goes on here. Now what's interesting is like the next day on that Sunday, we have that when Uranus actually stations direct there, we have the moon squaring it at the same time, pretty much as it stations. So just if you really want to feel those kind of Uranian flare-ups that might happen, Sunday the 22nd is definitely going to have that involved. And once again, it could be this play off of the longer story of Saturn and Uranus squaring, this is a very long storyline that has been going on for the last couple of years, and we're getting to the final pieces of it. But Uranus going direct and Saturn finally moving on, this feels like really, like we wanted to say like last fall was kind of it, but to me, there's still these pieces that are lingering. And this could be one of those delodging moments, so to speak, that is pushed off that new moon energy, at least in my eyes.
Oh, 100%. The first thing I was going to say is that could be a day to really feel stuck. And again, I would really embrace that because that's how you dislodge, right? But those energies, and with that, Uranus square the moon and Saturn conjunct Venus, like that's not easy. So, but super powerful in the sense of, to me, super liberating if you can be okay being uncomfortable for a little bit. That's the thing.
Absolutely. It has a big freedom signature to it.
Huge.
But sometimes the nature of the freedom and the liberation is maybe not what we had anticipated or wanted, or maybe we did want it, but when it's staring us in the face, it's has it on. Like, I love that word that you used, awkward. There is not to say that Aquarius is an awkward energy by any means, but it can have this. It just feels like a fitting word for some reason with it.
Well, even dissonance can feel like that Aquarian energy, but again, we have a tendency to like assign those some sort of a negative meaning. That's not what I mean by it. I just mean that's part of what it offers us to shift into something else. If we were comfortable and cozy and whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
We never change.
Yeah.
We never. So so it's almost like sit with it, sit with the discomfort, sit with the changes, sit with what's coming up. And possibly just because obviously the moon then goes on to make those conjunctions with Venus and Saturn that day later too. There's something about that wake up of the Uranian energy that then leads into sort of the commitment binding of the Venus Saturn piece, and where we move on to there. But the beauty of that is it literally leads us into a couple days later, the Sun Jupiter sextile. So, we get out of this potentially awkward and change and stucky kind of feeling space to then all this possibility, right? The potential of opportunity and new beginnings and how we work with that. It feels like whatever came before that was kind of worth its tension and weirdness in order to get to that opening.
Yep, I totally agree. Sometimes, the push is worth it. If you're willing to get, have a little push, then here you are, and in that new space, with space for a whole new story, which in my mind these days is the most exciting thing any of us can do. Because as we all know, once we shift that, right, everything else is different. Yeah,
that's right. And that's it. Just take that one home, put it in your pocket in Aquarius season, because it's not ruled by Mercury, but it is an air sign, and it's how the mind is functioning and the perspective and the viewpoint, and the story is so big. We tend to discount it because it's always running, it's always going in our mind. Although there are some people out there that supposedly do not have a voice in their head that talks. Did you hear that going around? Like, no, I know.
No.
We were like, what? And there is a just news flash for any of you that haven't heard this. This might have been like a year or two ago, maybe even longer at this point. But there was this whole article where there is like some people don't have a running dialogue in their head. And I know this because I actually know a few people that were like, wait, you have a voice talking in your head? Like it's a thing. And so many of us would love to like quiet that that voice. And it made me think, I'm like, what is going on in someone's head that doesn't have that narrator constantly? Like, is it more instinctual? Is it more animal? Like it was fascinating and blew my mind to even think about.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then you have to wonder, I mean, they have to still figure, I mean, there's still some story there. The question is just sort of like where it comes from, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a story, but how does it circle? Is it picture like it? If I, what I would trade to spend 24 hours in someone's brain that thought just to experience it, because it fascinates me and I'm so curious about it. But I'm tangenting right now. But
No, it's interesting. And I think I have South Node in Gemini, so there's just no way that I stopped the story in my head.
Yeah. Oh no, that story
got in.
You came out with the story.
Oh. But I was thinking when you're talking about like this ability to shift the story with Aquarius, I sometimes think of Aquarius as like I don't know, like I have like these crystals hanging in my windows that make like these rainbows in my living room, right? That kind of energy. And I think of Aquarius that way as sort of looking through a faceted crystal that allows you to see things in that different way. So the rainbow was one example, right? So the things are still what they are, but how you look through changes everything. And I think that vision or that lens is very much something that Aquarius, that we can all do through that archetype, which of course we all have, all of them. So it's available to us. But with these particular transits and things happening, we have more, I guess that crystal is more close to your eye, if you want to think of it that way, if you want to just take a peek.
Oh, I love that. It's like prismy.
Yeah.
Or even like like
yes.
the kaleidoscope.
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's great. Because and if that's, that's the beauty of Jupiter. That's the beauty of the sun meeting Jupiter there, is because Jupiter is all about the broadened perspective and the deepening that is potential with the way you view your world and the multitude of ways you can look at things and twist it around and create, dive into the abstract nature that life really is. It's not, we try to finite it and put it into particular boxes and stories, and this is what it is. But, all we have to do is turn something around like a few different times and a few different angles. And you get a whole new perspective. And so really, I feel like the beginning of the week, especially, especially once the moon gets to Aries, which will be Wednesday, January 25th, we'll have the moon conjunct Jupiter and make a sextile to the sun at that time. So there feels like if you're waiting, well, maybe not waiting, but if you primed for kind of that new fresh energy to really kick off this new moon period and to tap into that Jupiter sun sextile that's going on. It's like midweek. We're blessed with the rush of new beginning, kind of inspiration and like go get 'emness, especially since this is the first time we're going to have an Aries moon where Mars is also direct now, right? So it does seem like a very fresh breath of air, so to speak, then.
Yeah. And if you think about Aries, sometimes I think Adam Gainsbourg would always say that Aries is streaming consciousness. Like it's literally like now in the moment, right? And so I always think the invitation when there's something interacting with anything in Aries is to like literally like be so present now that you literally like life reveals itself to you in the moment. And that's I think one of the most powerful things about the instinctual nature of Aries. So this is, as you were talking, I was thinking that's part of the invitation here, right? Can you open yourself or your mind to what's actually happening right now, which what's actually happening right now is nothing to do with the story. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just, it's just what is revealing, which I find exciting, although most of the time I don't live there, but still.
But I still recognize the value in what that could
Yeah.
bring
And
to your life.
occasionally when I have those moments, it's usually a bit of an aha, meaning like something arises in my consciousness, right, or in my body, whatever, that I'm like, wow, like that's a real moment, right? That's not fabricated from something, a meaning I'm putting into something in my head or something I'm looking back on or something I'm anticipating in the future. It's actually being present for the moment, right? So,
Oh, I love that. Well, and to think about it too, if we're in Aquarius season, and it is about that future mindedness and that,
yeah,
looking ahead, and Jupiter's about that very same thing. Well, the
yeah,
moon's like, well, what are you doing today? What are you
yeah,
acting on right now? What are
yes,
how are you facilitating the future vision? How are you, moving into the
yeah,
Jupiterian energies of growth and
yeah,
expanding your life into the next direction it's going in? Well, I always think about the moon in Aries as picking the low hanging fruit,
yeah,
do what you can on that day just to get the ball rolling,
yeah,
the enthusiasm there. And it's, the time is nigh, as we could say,
yeah,
just sort of just get it going. So it's something that feels like, once we get past the Pisces energy that kind of starts off where we're just still kind of feeling this thing out, there is this breath of fresh air midweek with that Aries energy.
yeah,
So grab it, grab a hold of it, be in the now. There is no actual moment aside from the present one.
yes,
So take advantage of it, because that is where the power is. Now, one of the things that's exciting that comes a couple days later is that we have Venus, who is leaving the grass of Saturn. She's like, "I'll see you later, Saturn. It was
mhm,
fun, but I'm looking for better dignity." And she's gonna cruise on into Pisces, actually on it'll be the 26th there. So let me go ahead and bring her up in her specificness. That'll be
mm,
January 26th, at least in the evening time here,
yeah,
Pacific time. And so we got Venus coming into Pisces, her exaltation. And so I am totally looking forward to this.
yeah.
What do you think about Venus and Pisces?
Oh, I mean, well, I like Pisces. I like all the signs, but Pisces in general, I think a special, uh, I guess it's, wow, there's a shadow side too, but my initial feeling, I'm just saying, I mean, Pisces is, it's everything, right? I
It
mean,
is
everything has
everything.
its thing, but it is everything. But I think there can be such a, I guess, rekindling of not just faith. And the word faith these days kind of bothers me a little bit because I think knowing is such a stronger position than faith, but faith is kind of how we bridge to knowing. But
Mm,
but I say like just this like restoring of vision, right? Or being able to, um, not just the vision, but even holding more compassion. Venus and Pisces to me is the ultimate of being able to like have love unconditionally. Now I know we're humans, so like that is not something that's going to ever fully happen, but there is a bigger space for it, right? There's a bigger space to feel and to acknowledge where someone else is in their feeling space. And when we can be in that space, there's just so much possible. And plus it's imaginative and it's dreamy, and it's, romantic and all the things, candlelight dinners, if you like, all those kinds of things come in with it. So the more human approach, but yeah,
yeah.
possibility, I feel like is part of it too, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
The
Mm,
Jupiterian quality there.
yeah.
Because Jupiter, that's the thing too with she's going to be backed by that Jupiter in Aries there too. So she's exalted hanging out, but she's got this flavor of a little, passion and
Mm-hmm.
freshness and beginning. And if especially if certain relationships were had a little distance or a
Mm-hmm.
little coldness, or you're working out more logistics than the romantic side of things, if we're talking about like personal partnerships there,
Yeah.
she's gonna bring a little sweetness back in.
Yeah.
There's more bonding, there's more merging,
Mm,
and just as Tara said, there's actually compassion and feeling that's put
yeah.
into the relating process, for everyone, not just our significant others, but like
Yeah.
the story that you read about of someone in the paper, or
Mhm.
like somewhere across the world, or animals, that it's just
Yeah.
it's got this really tenderness, and that just can tap into any living thing and feel for it, so to speak. I love the creative vibes of it,
Oh yeah.
right? You know,
Mm,
she's in a dreamy, visionary
mm,
spot. So as far as like, you know, we're all artists in our own right, but if you have
mm,
an artistic discipline, or is that something that you do for a living, you know, there is this
yeah.
sort of hot spot period of really being able to tap deeper into a particular muse,
Mhm.
so to speak, which is
Yeah, no,
exciting.
yeah, it like definitely opens up our receptivity to inspiration, whatever you want to call that, right? Whether it's nature or spirit or energy, God, whatever your name is around it, but it definitely it opens that. It's like that. And for some people it's spirituality increases, right? That
Yeah.
openness to like your spiritual practice or that connection with something greater than yourself can be there as well. But we should probably talk about too, Venus and Pisces sometimes can be a little delusional,
What?
it can be.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, seeing the I always say this with nobody wants to be loved for their potential. They want to be loved for who they are now, right? And one of the shadow sides to me with Venus and Pisces is the tendency sometimes in really even accurately seeing to someone's soul or deep into their heart, right? And but at the same time failing to see what's actually happening right now, in real time, and so sometimes that can be a little bit trippy in the sense of the disconnect between what's deep in someone's heart. For example, if they're doing something that's very dysfunctional every day in their day-to-day behavior, to overlook that, even though the heart place may be accurate and on point, that's where things can get a little messy between the two. So sometimes Venus and Pisces, we have to deal with kind of lifting the veil and figuring out, you know, um, am I seeing it truly for what it is, or am I over romanticizing, over idealizing? And am I trying to so much see the good in something, which happens like, it's like when you first fall in love, right? You don't see any of the negative parts, or you just want to see all the beautiful things, and the rushes of hormones come on, and you feel all connected. But it is, I mean, but so that's why I say that's the other side. But for me, Pisces, it wants to dissolve what's not true, right? There's some level of it. And I'm kind of pulling from the Neptune, modern rulership here. But so even those moments when all of a sudden you realize, whoa, that thing or that person or whatever wasn't at all what I thought it was, it still brings you closer to what actually is true, right? And if you're open for that, that's a positive thing. So, but that can happen. It can feel like a little unravelly sometimes too, you know?
Yeah, I get that. I get
Yeah.
that. I mean, the fish is just the nature of, you know, mutable water to begin with, and it gets pulled in two different directions too. And so they can have
Yeah.
these like rose-colored glasses and
Yeah.
dreaminess and like all about it. And then, you know, the next day there can be like doubt and
Mhm.
uncertainty and like just
Mm.
you know, like there's this changing nature to
Yeah.
Pisces as well too. And so there is that, you know, there is that potential that all that glitters is not necessarily gold, but you know,
Yeah.
it's also one of those things that if you're in the moment and you're enjoying it while it's there, as long as you are willing to, I guess, kind of go with the flow and
Yeah.
realize that when she gets to Aries and all of a sudden she's in a totally different dignity scape, things may
Mhm.
change. But it's you know, it's just enjoy it, I suppose, and use a little bit of discernment, right? We always need the other sign. Let's say
Yeah.
we always need the polarity. So you just gotta kind of draw that in, throw a little Virgo in there if
Mm.
necessary. But other than that, I think I'll be excited
Me too.
for Venus to leave a Saturn sign.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit. So actually she won't be back for quite some time. That's a nice thing about back-to-back Saturn. You know, we're not
Mm.
crazy about it when we're in it, but once we're out of it, it takes a while to get back
It's true.
there. So now another thing that's happening like the next day is that we have Mercury. Actually it's not too long after that, on the 27th, we have Mercury making a square to Chiron. So this will
Mm.
be the third pass of this Chiron energy in Aries there from Capricorn. So you have any thoughts on that, or even just Chiron? And I've just been collecting Chiron and Aries thoughts from people just in general, since we're going to have
Yeah.
Jupiter on it soon here, and it feels like it's a big
Yeah.
theme.
I mean, to me, Chiron and Aries is always about, on some level, healing wounds of self-identity, or of our ability to kind of just be ourselves and put ourselves out there, and to feel, I guess, confident and courageous in just being what we are. So for me, like, just generally that is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we put Chiron with Mercury, right now, it's funny, we talk about story, but now, story is right back there
Right
again.
back at you.
Yeah, which can be really looking at, in particular, by, what part of my story is tied to something being wrong or not working well enough, or something being broken, something being wounded, some of these words. But it's also medicine, right, on the flip side of it. So for me, part of this can be very empowering around getting clear on what we think, whether it's using our voice, speaking our truth, being able to articulate what is, natural. See, to me, authenticity, again, we're kind of back to this. I talked about this before, but both Aries, to me, and Aquarius have a lot, both of them have a lot to do with authenticity. So I think this is part of it. Part of it to me is, am I speaking and thinking, and is my story and the way I'm looking at life, and Mercury also how I move through life, right? There's a certain level of coordination and movement with Mercury as well. Is that true to me? Is it me? Like, when I'm saying something to you right now, I'm making question myself on it. Am I just kind of making up something I think sounds good to say it for the podcast, or is it really coming from me? And to tell you the truth, maybe both. I don't know. These are not things that we can easily suss out, but I think it's something to pay attention to here. Yeah. Chiron and Aries is not easy. I mean, I was born during, I have that in my birth chart. But in general, I feel, because Aries so gets to the core just of, this is who I am. And so to deal with sort of that core sense of something's not okay with me, just how I show up in this life, that takes courage for anybody to face. And so all of us collectively, in some ways, are looking at this, right? Who are we?
Yeah. Yeah. And and then Mercury tapping into it within its whole, retrograde cycle here.
Yeah.
It feels like a big piece to asking that very question. And being, we think about Chiron being kind of that trigger piece, even if it's like the bigger triggers for more embedded stories and wounds, of course, but it's like trigger moments too.
Yes.
And so especially around the 27th, or maybe even before that, because obviously the moon is going to light up that space right before it, like 25th, 26th. This is where Venus, we're like, Venus, get into Pisces, but there is this Mercury square Chiron moment that's there too, that can, challenge us in that way of the identity, and how that identity is being communicated or expressed in the actual physical world, and in these pushes and these starts, and our contributions and our responsibilities and our legacy, all these types of things can just be on our mind. And here we are again, but it's it is the third pass there, so we're working through these particular things. But just bringing up that Chiron and Aries story and the things that you said, and these are themes that are going to continue, so it's good to be aware of them there now. So we're getting to first quarter. Our first fixed sign here. It's going to be in Taurus, of course. So let's see. I think is it on the North Node? Is it going to happen on it is. Look at that. The first quarter,
you're right.
on the North Node.
Whoa.
I didn't even write that down, but I felt like it
nice.
feels apropos. So it feels important.
Yeah. Yes.
It feels important here. Something's happening. So January 28th, this is a Saturday. We have that pushing off in Taurus. So we have this, it's kind of like okay, so this whole setup, I'm going to kind of like move a couple days forward because this feels like a very important time for not only this particular lunar cycle, but just the longer story of the retrogrades we went through, right? Because we have a first quarter in Taurus on the North Node, which, the North Node is going to bring up some sort of fated or destined movement or just some openings of the doors. Of course, it's first quarter. So we're at the midpoint of actual eclipse season here. So that's important in its own right. And so we have the following day on Sunday, we have Mercury, who is going to make its final trine, another third pass with Uranus, while the moon moves over it, which then leads us to the moon moving into Gemini on Monday. And it's going to make a conjunction with Mars, the first conjunction since it's been direct. And of course, Mars is ruled by Mercury, who just trined Uranus. And so there's this like 3-day theme, basically, starting with first quarter on the 28th, where I feel like things are, talk about that, catching the train.
Yes. Yeah.
We're on the train now. We might be dialing that compass. We might be throwing some people off the train, like this, or just ideas or things that we're doing, or making that space that we were talking about, making decisions. It seems very potent.
Yes. And there's so much of that Mercury stuff continuing on. And I just like, now we're moving, from a square to Chiron to a trine to Uranus. So it's almost like if you could see the progression of for using the word story, still watch that sort of progression, you can see how it has its like, I know we can call like the trigger of Chiron, right? And then we can see, oh, now it's moving towards not just a release point, but flow. Like where actually things can move in a new direction. So I almost imagine like with this story, especially because with Mercury and Capricorn, we didn't say this before, but the type of story we can be connected to, or the way we can be thinking when it comes to Mercury and Capricorn, can be very stuck in old roles, right? That's a natural thing to happen with that. And there can be, so this idea, this conditioned, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, here's where my things are moving. I almost feel it's like, okay, like you're moving along, right, up to this, and you're in this story, and things get a little stuck and you get a little triggered, right? And these things happen. But when you reach this point, it's almost like there's like a fork in the road, And so like where things were sort of like forcing and pulling in, now all of a sudden you're like, ooh, right? There's this place and it pulls more naturally. So I'm not saying that all the intensity goes away, but I feel like that's part of what an opportunity, right? You can more easily see it with a trine. You can more easily see, oh, this way would be so much easier, right? Or more easeful, maybe is a better word for it. And that's exciting to me to think that might, I want to look for it.
Yeah, I feel like it is exciting because, and that's the thing, right? When we get the pressure of that square to Chiron for the final time, and then all of a sudden we get that release. We get the release of the trine to Uranus and in earth signs. So there's actual, like, there's results, there's productivity, there's something that can be done. Like, like we can see, we can communicate certain things, set it up, make these changes happen. And we have to like keep this in the mind of, this is first quarter period, but there is a big Uranus component to this whole cycle. Not only was Uranus stationing direct at the new moon, but we are on our way to the full moon in Leo, which is going to be square Uranus. So there's something about this midpoint with Mercury. And especially since Mercury was trining the North Node in the new moon too. And so here first quarter comes around and like really lights that up as well. And so, it just feels like there's solutions and there's resolve and there's liberating energies and there's actually forward movement that is tangible and things can be done. And something might have like triggered to get that into place with the Chiron piece, but here we are and it's moving. And I say, I think that will feel good, even if it's tense and we have to get motivated with it. I feel like it's a good thing. So that being said, let's think about relationship. Oh yeah, I can't forget that. One of the things that is well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Am I getting ahead of myself? I'm always getting ahead of myself. It's my very nature. Oh, okay. So the sun, we're gonna flow back in with Uranus and Chiron, right? Because the sun is going to move on. It's gonna move on down the road, move on down the road to on February 1st through the 3rd. We have basically the sun making a sextile to Chiron here. And then on Wednesday the 1st, and then on February the 3rd, we have, well, kind of the 3rd, 4th, get close in there.
Yes, yeah. We count it.
It's all relative. We have the sun square to Uranus. Now, of course, that's going to be lit up with the full moon that's coming on the 5th, but this is kind of the exact pass. So here, Mercury makes these moves from a different position, right? It tenses up Chiron and it flows with Uranus, but here the sun is like, you know what? I'm going to work with Chiron, but I'm going to challenge Uranus. And so what do you think about kind of like the reverse piece of that coming in?
I don't know, maybe Chiron helps soften us up enough, right? That we actually like can be malleable for the square with Uranus. Because Chiron, one thing we didn't talk about this, but it also just opens us up emotionally, right? Most times I find that when we're having whatever placements or transits or things that have to do with Chiron, we get more sensitive, right? Emotionally. In that place, and that can be a really positive thing because it can open us up even if it hurts a little bit. And since this is a sextile, I think overall that it would be like, sounds weird to say a good kind of hurt, but it'd be more of like an opening to be more available. And once we do that, then sometimes when more difficult things happen or we have more triggered by something more difficult, we have more capacity, because it's almost like we've been, I don't know, truly, it feels like if I had to make a move into like, I don't know, a different space that I didn't fit in very well, if I could be a little more malleable and if I could stretch and my body was more flexible, right, I'd be able to get into the space I need to go. And that's how it feels a little bit to me. Especially with Chiron and Aries is so physical is the other thing, so, but it's interesting.
It makes me wonder, just in relation to kind of go back to the piece of like what you're talking about with the integrity that's needed there, and like that personal integrity. Even though Mercury challenged that, or something outside challenged that, and Mercury had to process that, the sun comes around and it'd be, you know what? Yeah, that is me. And like, I can push myself to do, that's who I'm becoming, or that's what my character is drawn to do. And it asks hard things of me, or like it triggered my ability to be assertive with my life and, go after what I want or what I desire. But it's just enough to like open the door to be like, all right, we're making some changes. We're gonna, it's time. We are going to embody the change. We're coming back to that kind of earth embodiment of Uranus there. And it's a hot, dry energy because the moon is waxing to that full moon. So it's not something you're contemplating. It's like, no, you're challenging your own self-development now. And it's like, and especially the moon's in Cancer at this point too. And so you're really feeling into your own space. Your intuition's kind of lit up, your sensitivities and your vulnerabilities are also highlighted to some extent, but it feels like, there's this interesting whole trajectory of like how Mercury moves through the phase and the sun.
It is.
So
it was it's a good pickup. It's just, I don't know. I keep coming back to the feeling of like, once it does a square with Uranus, it's almost like if you've been softened or mushed up enough, and opened up enough, or whatever words we want to use here, it's almost like you're like, okay, fine. It's just a little step further to like go here. So it's all, and sometimes that's even welcome, right? Sometimes the square, even though it can be a challenge, is welcome because it actually pushes you. It gives you like that last sort of shove or push, or it's like the rubber band finally pulling all the way back, right? That actually gives you a push into it. So I think that there can be a really positive, to your point, I loved it when you talked about, this is who I am, and this is me having the courage to step out and do it. This is me in the world. This is, me, how I feel on the inside. And I'm going to step out and be more of that in my life. And that square almost just feels in some ways like a celebration. Like, it sounds probably a little strange to say that, but it almost is. It's almost like, yeah, bring it on, because I'm ready to do it. And I need enough of a challenge to prove I can do it. That to me feels almost like a self-satisfaction that comes from, yeah, I got here. And you need a test to know where you are, right? You don't know if you've actually crossed the line into the next thing unless there's a test to show you. So
just to show you that you, yeah. No,
yeah, you gotta
I
prove
love
it,
that.
prove it that you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe even part of it is like going through that whole process, making the changes, and then getting comfortable with what's changed, and the receiving the
Yeah.
receiving of the change, and the evolution of the self, and the choices that you've made, and the space you've created to some
Yeah.
extent. I feel like there's that space there. And yeah, and it's gonna feel different. It could feel a little electric. It could feel a little
Yeah.
foreign. It could
Mhm.
feel, it can feel like you're almost getting to know yourself in this completely different way. Because squares, they can be tense, but they can also just be activating.
Yep.
Like that's the thing
Yeah.
where something actually happens. It's not speculation. It's not it's like, no, it has happened. We're
Yeah.
illuminating this, especially with the sun there. Um, so even though, yeah, there's possible tension, but it feels really supportive in a way,
Mhm.
especially since Uranus is backed by that Venus in Pisces too. But we got to
Yeah.
talk about that Venus in Pisces, because she's doing her own thing at this exact time that's leading us to our full moon here. And
Yeah.
she's getting real close to a square with Mars. So we have
Mhm.
Venus and Mars making a square. It's
Mm.
exact on uh well, so she's doing her own thing, right? She's going to actually sextile the North Node on February 2nd, in between all our sun activity that's
Mhm.
going on here. And then she is going to go on and square Mars on
Mm.
the 4th, technically, I believe. You can kind of see it here. But this is a big part in the Venus Mars cycle, right? These are our relationship planets, and
Yep.
in our once again, we're back to the relating thing, our relating outside of ourselves, but also the
Mhm.
relationship on the inside, and our sense of balance, and how much we, allow in compromise, and how that factors into our own forward, momentum, and our desires and
Mm.
individual self in life. So there is this sort of relationship tension that is part of this, which is interesting to think about, knowing that this new moon cycle is steeped in Venus conjunct
Mm.
Saturn too. So what do you think about Venus squaring Mars, and maybe adding a little, just a little flow with that sextile to the North Node right before it?
Yeah, I mean, with the square, I mean, what's the last quarter square, right? So,
Mhm.
we can kind of pull that into it. And for me, when I work with last quarter square, there's some level of what we call crisis in consciousness, right? So oftentimes that is an awakening around something. If it's relationships, right? It could be about, when do I need to talk? When do I need to listen? Right? When do I need to give? When do I need to take? Kind of those back and forth pieces for sure. And it's funny because it kind of brings us back to the conversation we had earlier on about just our relationship with everything, right? So I know
Yeah.
Venus and Mars, we think about being like love relationships, but I do think it just sort of re-emphasizes the theme we talked about earlier, which is, hey, how am I choosing to partner with things? And how can I suddenly become aware of, what works and doesn't work, and which approach, squaring off with something is sometimes the best way to, well, again, it brings it right up in your face, right? There's an element of that. So I think that's part of it. With the sextile with the North Node, to me, I mean, there's a ease and a grace in that, right? That helps us to move forward in a more, it's Taurus, which thinking about with the North Node here. So that is about getting down to simplicity, right? What we really need, ease and peace, and kind of coming into that space of, well, I'm back to use these words again, what we really value, what's really meaningful to us. So even while we're having like a little bit of this struggle of, how do we actually do this relationship thing, which could come up in our daily lives is just like some kind of a conflict, right? A new chance to look at, am I able to even communicate with, the person that something's going on? But I feel like the sextile with the North Node brings us a sense of calm, right? Even in that square is how I'm looking at it. And because it's the last quarter square between Venus and Mars, they've been, we're not just starting something, which means we have a relationship between the two already. And that always has a different feel than, for example, going on a first date. This is more like, okay, right? We've been going around a number of times. How can we finally get to a new place that we're ready to be at? Because we've had enough of these experiences, and here we are again. And maybe this time with the capacity to actually look at it in a new way.
I love that, because as you're speaking, it came to me, Tara, is looking at this, going back to maybe the challenging side of Venus and Pisces, or, thinking about, okay, so this Venus and Pisces, she wants things to get along, she wants everything to be kosher. She wants, maybe doesn't want to rock the boat, wants to have that, but she can overlook some things or maybe not address some things. Where Mars over there in Gemini, it's a Mercury sign. This is a contesting sign. This is saying something. This is bringing something up. And we got Mercury over here that's getting ever closer to Pluto. It's in proximity. So whatever Mars is thinking about, Pluto ain't gonna go away with this here. So I feel like there's this tension between maybe once again, that kind of ties into the whole chironic piece with Aries as well, is, bringing something up versus throwing it, pushing it under the rug. And what that does in all types of relationship, because if you don't address something, you're only going to have this particular harmony for so long until Venus gets into Aries and she's like, wait a second, now we really got to talk about it. But there does feel to be this tension of like, you can't always go with the flow, and just hope something works itself out or escape a particular issue that needs addressing. Even though Mars and the Gemini action can be, there brings up debates and it can be a little annoying and like back and forth. It's like, it feels like something is trying to come out in service of this, like you said, this is, kind of a closing type of direction, and it's not the first date, and it's like, we've been around this so many times. How are we this is transition energy with mutable energy. How are we moving this along to its next stage? And so that can play into the component of the Venus Saturn piece in the new moon, is like, if we are in a cycle of making new commitments and having new plans around the longer range vision of what this relationship is and does and is its purpose, well, we got to talk about it.
Yeah. But at the same time, from the Venus side, part of it is, well, and what do I just need to accept, right? Here's another way to think about that Pisces energy. What do I need to accept that this is how it is? And then that gives us another opportunity to make a choice. If this is how it is, then do I want it? Do I not want it? Right. And that can be really useful too. And because too much of the Mars and Gemini, right? Sometimes, even though like communication, talking is super important, if we just force that on someone, for example, without giving them notice, or like Colin Bedell will say, did you make an appointment? Sometimes, if you can't just all of a sudden like, well, I love when he says that because it's so easy. And I know I can do it sometimes. Oh, I want to resolve it, right? So I want to talk about it right now, and it's shooting out of my mouth, but the person's not prepared to receive it. So again, all this balance back and forth of, what do we actually do to be heard and to be received, and to your point, to communicate and to move things to a better place? But I just feel like it's not as hard as we might think, because I feel like we've already set the stage up. And so if we're willing to be honest and aware and kind of, when I say, own our shit, right? Kind of really like be able to step up to the plate that way.
Mercury, Pluto.
That it's more that we can really be open to seeing, oh my gosh, I didn't see it that way. Right. And from that point, we can return to, I think, a more stable place, which brings us back kind of that North Node action, which wants that, right? It wants a certain level of peace and stability and simplicity. It doesn't want things to always be volatile all the time. But sometimes we can't get to that place without stirring things up a little bit. So, that was great.
Depends on how long we stay there. I love that, you know, because at some point, like, you can stir the pot, stir the pot, stir the pot, try to get the resolution, but some things we just have to accept. Some things we just have to have compassion
Yeah.
for in the difference,
Yeah.
and find the compromise, you know, through it all. And so
Yeah.
that's a great point, you know, and that's the thing. We're dealing with a square here. We're dealing with these two different
That's
types of
right.
energies.
Yeah.
And you know, it doesn't that's just how it works. Yeah, I love that. Well, see if I love it when I'm in the middle of it, but
Well,
let's
yeah,
go on
that's
to
always
back to the now. Well, speaking of the now, let's go on to our full moon, which is going to be in Leo, so it's in a fire sign. So much like Aries, there's this quality of being in the moment.
Yeah.
So February 5th, which is a Sunday, it's going to happen about 10:28 a.m. here on the Pacific Coast. And yeah, so we have a full moon at 16 degrees of Leo, and it is squaring that Uranus action we were talking about. Now, of course, we've already had a taste of the square with the sun making it before there, but of course the moon is going to light that up right before that happens. And of course we still have our tension between the two relationship planets, Venus and Mars there. We have of course we have the midpoint of eclipses taking place here. We have a midpoint of Uranian eclipses taking place, right? Because the last eclipse was a lunar eclipse, you know, exactly on Uranus in Taurus. And the next, well, we have the solar eclipse in Aries, but there'll be another lunar eclipse that's going to be conjunct our opposite Uranus here coming too. So this is kind of that in between point with that eclipse energy as well. What else? You know, Mercury's getting closer and closer to Pluto. Am I missing anything else here? Of course, that moon's going to trine Chiron right beforehand. It's going to basically sextile Mars, trine Chiron, and then square Uranus, and then make that full moon. So Leo, big energy, you know. Leo brings the drama. It doesn't maybe intend to, but it's
I always argue it's not, you know, Scorpio's real drama, but Leo gives it a good good run for its money for sure. But yes, yeah. Do you kind of feel like it's interesting? It's so, I mean, of course, every time there's a full moon, right? It's the sun moon opposition. So there's always a sort of integration in some ways of like the inner and the outer, at least relationship we have with ourselves. But I feel with that Uranus squaring that whole thing, it's just this continued theme around self-liberation. And in this case, Leo, you know, very much moon in Leo, right? So much being attached to the personal inner sense of self, right? This is me. This is how I feel I need to be. This is how I need to be seen, those pieces. Of course, then with opposing that sun and Aquarius, which is much more objective and outside looking in, like we talked about before, but still forget even the signs, right? Sun, sense of purpose, how I shine, how I'm putting myself out in the world, and moon, right? My inner sense of self and how I feel. And I always think of the moon as like my okay meter, right? Every moment it's like the part of me that's saying, am I okay here? Am I okay now? How about in this moment? All the way from the inside out, it's got the awakener shaking the whole thing up, right?
Yeah.
So again, freedom, liberation, these are ways we can look at it. But the other way it could also feel is upsetting, right? It can be upsetting in the sense of unpredictable things happen, which, you know, in my mind is useful. But as you were saying before, I'm not sure how useful I'll find it in the moment, you know, when it's happening to me.
Yeah.
But to me, there's so many repeating themes around, am I awake to, you know, to what I am, what I'm doing, how I feel on the inside, what I'm doing on the outside, how those two balance each other, right? That sense of awareness between the two, or the integration between the two. And two, I mean, and Uranus is still relatively close to the North Node, you know, and I know it's moving, you know, I know the nodes are moving retrograde, but it's still relatively close. So it's interesting. You've got this like Taurus point kind of holding the center, I don't know, between those two energies. So where's the balance in all of this is the thing I feel. And maybe it's that Uranus needs to throw us off balance enough that we get, back onto the space where we actually find where the balance is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think you kind of brought this up when we just talked about the Leo moon from the get-go, is, we can pull back in that word integrity once again, and authenticity, right? Because Leo is that, it's that heart space, it's that personal sense of self and expression, and being able to shine your particular gifts and perform them in some way that is then shared and and lit up and expressed in the collective space. So there is this tension of emotionally what I'm offering, what I'm connected to, what I'm passionate about, what my inner child wants out of life, and is that being reflected or shown or spotlit in the world, or in my future plan, like we could get back to that kind of future space too. And so it feels very recalibrating and catalytic, this whole full moon, to get back to that place of like true authenticity, whether that's situation, because it's going to be a full moon in these outward reaching signs. So if there is this idea that something could happen outside of you that jars things, absolutely, when we're thinking about fire and air together. But is this the recalibration of the compass? Is this the thing that you needed to do before, but now the universe is doing for you? Or is this you finally, stepping up and be like, you know what? I just, the integrity within myself, and I can't ignore how I feel any longer. And I gotta do this for me. I gotta make these choices for me. And full moons can have a celebratory experience to it too. So there could be something that is, for some of you out there, like, what if you're showing your art for the first time in a new way, and it's uncomfortable for you to, show your creations and out into public, but now it's like, here they are, just thinking of examples here, because there can be moments where it's like comes to a point of celebration, but it's still a little strange, still a little awkward, and something that we have to adjust to. So there's many variables of how this can take place, but there is kind of this jarring catalytic what comes after this point. That's kind of what I'm getting from it.
No, I feel that too. And thinking about just something with Leo and Aquarius in general, and especially in the opposition, when you're thinking about sort of trying to get the balance right between those two. Let's say that we are putting some show out there in the world, we think that's the Leo thing. And if we're having difficulties with that, or somehow it doesn't feel in alignment, right? Or maybe we don't feel like we're being received. There's always, two ways to look at that, right? If we are with the Leo side, right? Is it authentic me? That's kind of what it comes back to, meaning is me, myself, being the show I'm putting out there in the world, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be on some big stage. I mean, it could just simply be you putting yourself out there at work and whatever it is you do. But so one checkpoint would be, is what I'm putting out, is it me from the heart?
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes so I especially with Uranus squaring here, that might be where the adjustment needs to be made. Maybe, in fact, and maybe everybody loves what you put out there, but maybe in your heart, this isn't really me. I like doing it because Mel cheers every time I do it, right? So whenever I say this, I get a good applause. So that's one side. But sometimes the other part is we get frustrated because whatever the audience is, which I'm now kind of aligning with Aquarius, the audience doesn't seem to receive it, right? But sometimes it's not, if the show is authentic, sometimes you just need to figure out, are you going to the right place to share it? So for me, I always look at this balance back and forth, because frustration can come on either side, but you got to kind of check out which side it is for you that something is not quite in alignment. Or we can go back to the use of the word integrity. Because like I think about examples of myself in my own life, and not in some fancy stage, but I can just think of things that I wanted to share from my heart with people in my life, right? And I kept going back to the same people that I wanted to receive it, and they weren't into it, right?
Yeah.
That's not something wrong with my Leo when I'm delivering. That's me expecting, putting that out to the wrong person or the wrong group. So sometimes we just have to sort of readjust. Oh, this is the perfect show, but I need to be in a different city or a different group or a different space, right? I keep on trying to sell, I don't know, sell the face cream to the person who doesn't need any. Do you know, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
No, I think that's
and
brilliant. Yeah. I
and
think
with
that's
your
brilliant.
and don't you
Go
think
ahead.
with your Uranus squaring, and it's like either way, it's like it's the freedom, the freedom and liberation that comes from actually seeing, first of all, being able to actually see where you are in that space, and then have the guts to like adjust whatever side needs to be adjusted. That's not easy, but sure is freeing. Sure feels good to be able to not, one, you don't want to put on a dog and pony show for people that even if they eat it up all day long, it's not really coming from the heart. And on the flip side, if your heart's all in it and you're pouring it into like, a place that doesn't want to receive, is wasted energy. So
yeah. So once again, how do we recalibrate that? Something's
Yep.
a little off. We just gotta tweak it a little bit, and not not let that, like, what might be a little off, like, derail us completely, or like because it, like you said, it's like, I'm not, they're not receiving this thing that I'm giving fully from my heart. Is like, at that moment, do you just give it up completely? No, it's like, that's the thing, is you have to have that, it's this interesting validation process that comes with it too, because that's a big component of Leo, is like, and the whole idea of Leo and Aquarius, and like getting this validation and this receiving of, what you're putting out there and what your heart has to share, and just realizing the big component is as first checking in with your heart, and like being like, I validate my experience and my expression, because I know deep down this is who I am and what I want to share, or what I want to say. And starting there, like starting with that moment with yourself, before like maybe changing the audience, or like, and I really resonated with what you said about doing certain things, that just because you get a reaction and everybody loves them doesn't mean that you're meant to be doing that forever, or it's not who you are anymore in this particular moment. And that's a big thing with the theme of this particular year, especially as we go into all this Aries energy, is that there are new characters on display. We are all changing, and we're growing, and we're moving into these new beginnings in life that might not be aligned with these old ways of expression. So I think that is a very valid point, and something that I resonate with, and I've seen happen in my life in the past, and being themes of, I mean, I have a Leo midheaven, so I think that does come up from time to time. And just because someone's applauding you, you're like, does that mean that, and then it's almost like this whole thing where you feel stuck inside. You're like, I have to do this forever because they like it. Oh man. Oh, that took me up. But yeah, I think that no, that is a very good way of looking at it. So mark your calendars, February 5th. There's action in the air. And yeah, so all right, where do we go from here? So the next thing about the week coming, it's an interesting week, because the week of February 6th, we have Mercury's doing a bunch of stuff. Mercury is basically going to sextile Neptune, I think basically on Monday there. Then it's going to move on to this this Pluto conjunction we've been waiting for, which isn't to the end of the week. It's like Friday, which it actually happens there. And then it's going to ingress into Aquarius on Saturday, on the 11th. Now, a couple things else going on this week. I'm going to chunk them all together before we get to the Mercury piece. But we also have Venus. Venus is coming around in Pisces here to make a sextile to Uranus. So she's tapping in to this whole Uranian vibe, which is going to be happening midweek, about on the 7th and 8th there. And then we have Mars, who's going to make its third sextile to Chiron in Aries. So we're seeing these other planets and these themes that we've talked about come up. But there's something about this particular week that has these elongated Mercury moments. And I've made this mistake before, but I made this thing in the forecast before, where I'm like, oh, it's all that's going on is Mercury doing like one or two things, and that's it. But those weeks are the crazy weeks because it's like the Mercury action, it puts things in motion. It's like
Yep.
all of a sudden, all the communication, all the
Yep.
little bits and pieces start to come together, and life really just moves. And so what are your thoughts about kind of like Neptune to Pluto, then to Aquarius? Of course, it's leaving its shadow phase at this time too, because this will be the third pass with Neptune, which is like interesting because that was the whole thing that jammed up the airwaves and got everyone sick around Christmas. So not to say that will happen again, but we've had some experience with Mercury sextiling Neptune here.
Oh, I mean, I really like the feel I get. I think it's just a continuation on this story thing. And I think one of the reasons why Mercury action is so point on, like you were saying, is because it does affect our mindset, right? It does affect the way we look at things. So to have it with Neptune and coming in there with Pluto, right? I'm just saying, like, that's like, it's like the ultimate transform your mind, your thinking, your story. And at the same time with Neptune, like wash away all the things that are false. I think of Neptune sometimes as like, right, all the like sand castles we build and then like the ocean comes and washes them away, right? So it's like kind of all the things that we thought were real that are not there. But if we think about it not in quite such a tumultuous approach, I also think Neptune really makes space. We talked about this earlier. So part of this, I think, is about creating space, right? Mental space, space to think about something different, space to look at something differently, space to have a different definition for something. Whenever something's really strong Mercury, one of the things I challenge myself to do is to give things I normally say that I call certain things or give certain words. I challenge myself to just call it something else, or even sometimes just use a different description or a different word. Because I think part of what this is doing, again, is pulling us out of an old default mental position, and that we do it so fast without even thinking, right? We say, oh, XYZ is happening. It means blah, blah, blah. And that's why sometimes we'll say, I'll joke, well, call it anything you want, make up a different word, call it something different. Because if we let go of those, Mercury is so much about wanting to categorize, right? And associate and relate and all these different things. So the minute that you kind of make even a tiny little shift that way, you give room for something different. And that's how I feel with the combination of both Pluto and Neptune with Mercury. It's like the mind has to change. Now, we could say communication as well. I mean, movement, all these things we talked about that have to do with Mercury. But to me, the core of Mercury is perception. Right. So that would be the key thing I would be here, like something in the way that I perceive things, something in the way that I look at life, something in the way I connect the dots and make sense of things is under big renovation.
Well, that's the thing. I'm sure I've said it a handful of times on the podcast is, you change your mind, you change your reality. Like
that's true.
That's the big component of it.
Yeah.
And there's really something to be said about kind of the midweek there, because there's almost like the sweet spot with the discerning Virgo moon, right? Because on like Tuesday, Wednesday, the moon basically dances over and connects with, an opposition to Venus and trine to Uranus. So it lights up that Venus Uranus sextile on Wednesday. And then it goes on to oppose Neptune, trine Mercury, and then trine Pluto. So there's something about midweek where all these planets' emphasis are coming together, all these different stories, and it feels I like it that it's flowing, it's creating this grand trine with Earth, right? And Earth is practical, it's pragmatic, it wants to look at things in a discerning and productive view, and it's just a little matter of fact in that way. And it's contesting this kind of Piscean place, which has its spiritual qualities but also has these potential, like, the rose-colored glasses that we were talking about, or just looking at things, sometimes that story that we're talking about is actually an illusion, right?
Yes.
Because it is like this facet that we've created in our own imaginations. Imagination is a very powerful thing and it creates wonderful things, but our imagination also can not be in our best bet sometimes too.
Mhm.
So there is this discerning, pragmatic moon that is like, no, let me figure this all out. Let me get this all. And it really just is shifting Earth. There's like kind of like to quote Gray and I's whole thing with the forecast, there's Earth magic here that's taking place, and life is moving, and Mercury's communicating, and transmissions are coming in, and we're letting go of certain things, and we're attaching to the change that comes with others, redefining the narrative, bringing in the liberating aspects of
Yep.
Uranus, and how
Yep.
change can, and then going back into the word you had with Venus and Pisces, the acceptance of that all,
Yeah.
and flowing into that. And so it feels really supportive in many ways to me, especially midweek here.
Yeah, it's like the one simple word when you were talking that just came to me. It's kind of just about getting real and seeing what's real, right? And that's, I mean, all this energy is lined up to do that, I feel. And it sounds like a simple thing to say, but every little shift we make to seeing something a little closer to what it actually is. I mean, think about how good that feels in a relationship. Think about how it feels. Well, I mean, I suppose unless you're trying to hide something, right? That'd be different. But I mean, like, I just like for myself, I think like if I'm having spending time with someone and I realize that they are seeing more of me, right? Or someone understands you more for a second, right? Or someone sees you more clearly. And when you have those moments in your own life, I mean, that is really rewarding in the sense of like real, right? And maybe it's just that me, like I'm very, very passionate about having more moments that are real, even when they are challenging or a struggle. Because for me, there's so much value in what I would say, wow, that thing was really difficult, but it was real, right? And I step away and I have this sort of feeling of having seen that or the person or whatever the situation is for what it is. And I think part of this feels that way. And when we do that, I really do think we empower ourselves. Like that's a big step in our evolution. One little moment, even of seeing something in yourself, discovering something, oh my gosh, right? I've been looking at it that way for the last 10 years. This is what it actually is. It's huge. And you were talking about shifting kind of with that energy with Virgo. And I do think of Virgo as like it's earth, but it is like shifting sand, right? So it's the ability, right, to still have that granularity, but to be able to move into the next shape or form, which doesn't have to mean we have any problem with the things that we look at that weren't real, right? Like I don't say this in the sense of making a problem with any of that, which gets back to the, the Venus and Pisces, which is, oh, how interesting. I had that viewpoint about my friend for the past 10 years. And I suddenly realized I thought they liked this thing and they didn't like it. And how funny, I bought it for their birthday every year and they didn't actually tell me they didn't like it, right? Those kinds of weird experiences, right? But then it takes you to this new level again of reality, which I think feels good. Huh.
Yeah. I think it feels good too. And it's like a whole lead up, which is kind of fascinating too, because I mean, first off, Mercury is, just because of its retrograde cycle, is, it needs to catch up to the sun. So even at the time of, Tara and I talking right now, literally tomorrow, we have the sun conjuncting Pluto. And so, there is that kind of change, and that's being illuminated, and we're going through these pieces in our life. And sometimes it takes the mind a while to catch up with all that, and to integrate it, and to understand it, and to, perceive it in a particular way. And so there's something that seems like it's almost like we catch back up with the Pluto component at this particular time. And it's all pushing to our last quarter moon in Scorpio that's coming on the Monday, the 13th, right? So we get out of this, the Pluto moment. Mercury moves into Aquarius, which we'll talk about here in a second. But there is this, we're pushing to this last quarter turn of events phase that is really aligned once again with this kind of changing dynamic and sinking into things that are deeply felt, and once again that kind of Plutonian dynamic, and how our lives are changing, and the feelings that bring up within that, and the healing that could come from that as well. And so that whole storyline feels right to me.
Well, and we're still dancing back and forth between the fixed signs. Like it's funny. I mean, think about we're in like at the full moon, or we're really kind of we started the whole conversation with this, but yeah. And as we kind of progress through, especially I think, at least, I don't know how you feel about when I think about that Scorpio to Aquarius. meaning those are, you know,
Mhm.
the last two fixed signs, they do have a greater, I'm not rating this in some sort of better or worse, but they do have more capacity for objective awareness, right? There is more ability to be seeing what's actually going on from that objective awareness. And so that change can really be catalyzed in really powerful ways. At least that's how it feels to me. And I'm not in any way trying to say that Taurus and Leo are, you know, less evolved or anything. It's not my point, but they are definitely in the wheel below the horizon, which gives them, you know, a different level of awareness. So now we're into this territory of like, and it's last quarter anyway, which puts us back to this we talked about before, but crisis in consciousness, right? There is awakening. There's an awareness of maybe even this is the change that's happening. And even though there may, of course, you know, it's a square, so there's still going to be some challenge or struggle, but there is a really, to me, powerful and awakening component of actually seeing, oh, this is what I've been doing, right? Oh, this is what I've been seeing, or this is how I've been relating with myself or relating with life. And now all of a sudden we have this capacity to see it in a whole new fashion, which shifts. So to me, there's a, I guess we're back to liberating again, because this does feel, at this point, does feel very liberating to me. Yeah.
And it feels liberating through the sense of just kind of addressing the harder stuff with it, right? You know, because Scorpio can bring up more difficult stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
part of the whole thing with, and once again, we get kind of get to this polarity of signs, right? Because when I think about Scorpio and Aquarius, the thing that the problematic side of it is actually when maybe deeper content or something that needs to be addressed or healed is glossed over and
Yeah.
detached from, and not, you
Yes.
know, there's this kind of
Yeah.
separation that doesn't deal with it. But on the other side of that, if it is dealt with, you know, a lot of times we have to deal with certain traumatic experiences in life or deep emotions in a way that is from maybe more a different perspective view, and something that we can pull up and detach from it to see the bigger perspective so that we can navigate something without being submerged by it.
Yep.
So it's like, it's the, you know, we keep coming back to the facets of either side here, but there is something to be said about this whole component, because the last quarter moon is essentially aligned with Saturn conjuncting the sun. So there is even more of a kind of like really, because I feel like we're getting to this discernment piece.
Yeah.
We're getting to this kind of calling out and looking at things, and it's really fascinating to think about, because you know there is that kind of sobering that happens when the sun and Saturn meet together, right? Because you know they are traditionally enemies of one another. Like, you know, this is the brightest light in the sun and the whole, you know, centered around everything, and here's this far-reaching planet that's the coldest and the darkest, and it's so having them come together is always an interesting yearly occurrence. But it also happened, and it's going to be the last time the sun conjuncts Saturn in its own sign for quite a long time. So we have to think about that as well. But we also have this component where Venus and Neptune are meeting in a conjunction on the same day. So that's going to happen on the 15th and 16th of February. So basically Wednesday and Thursday, we have this dual action of Sun, Saturn, and Venus, Neptune. Talk about breaking up, but they're like aversion signs. They're not necessarily talking to each other there, but who is talking to them actually is on Wednesday, the moon in Sagittarius will be transferring the information from the sextile with the Aquarian planets to a square with the Pisces. So that's an interesting illumination point too. And so many storylines we can pick up with this one, I'm sure. But yeah, I don't think Venus Neptune is going to be two rose colored glasses at this time, because it's hard to ignore old Saturn, Saturn's sun. And same with Mercury now in Aquarius. And these same days, Mercury is squaring the nodes and making a sextile to Jupiter. So this is definitely a little hot spot period, the 15th through the 17th of February and the end of Aquarius season. So anything that jumps out about to you about this, any of these configurations?
Oh,
You're like everything all at once,
I
but
know.
nothing.
Yeah. I'm like, it is a lot going. It's a lot of conversations at the same time.
Yeah, it is. It's true. A lot to weed through.
Yeah. I guess it feels inside. As you were talking, I was thinking about how both the sun and Venus are so bright, right? So like the kind of at least parts that we identify in the sky and in ourselves as being kind of bright light energy, and they both are really have serious planets right on them, asking
Yeah.
for asking for something different, right? Asking for something to shift. So that's the overwhelming feeling to me, between the two of them. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think that that's going to have the normal Neptune Venus conjunction in Pisces feel. And let's see, that's going to be, so that little deal is going to be, is ruled by Jupiter, right? And that's conjunct Chiron. So yeah, in Aries. So no, I think I think it's more of an unraveling than anything else. And at the same time that something unravels, then of course Saturn conjunct the sun is like, okay, but like, where's the backbone, right? What's getting put in place? So I think it's a bit of a challenge. Now Mercury square the nodes in some level is always reclaiming voice, reclaiming mind, reclaiming thoughts, reclaiming how we look at things. Because that's how I work with what we call in evolutionary astrology, right? A planet square the nodes we call like a skip step, right? Something to reclaim or something to kind of drop into place at the time, which to me just re-emphasizes the story piece, right? How am I looking at something? But that's kind of a general. It's a lot, and it's not particularly to me woven together, which isn't a problem, but it just means that how we experience it to me could be quite different depending on, of course, where it's hitting our own charts, but there's definitely different conversations. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those times where you're like, and this was happening to me, and then while this was happening, that
Yeah.
happened. And then
Yeah.
that happened. And then I'm like, all these things are happening. you know?
Yeah.
So and it really feels like there's kind of a wrapping up of the actual lunar cycle itself, right? We started out with Saturn, Venus conjunct Saturn.
Mm.
And now the sun's conjunct Saturn, and Venus has moved on to Neptune. So there's something in relation to just the Venus Saturn
Mm.
piece that now is in this totally new space, where because it's interesting. I feel like the conversation energy is going to be kicked up, right? Whether it's
Mm.
internal or external, or trying to figure things out, or
Mm.
communicating with what the actual plan is for the future.
Yeah.
How are we embodying this? What's the changes being made? Where Mercury is obviously leaning into Jupiter here with these kind of new beginnings, and
Yeah.
piecing out what the actual more abstract like the
Yeah.
wider view of this all. And when we think about the relationship component with this all too, and it coming to maybe its own, like, maybe spiritual turning point to some extent, or needing to
Mm.
have compassion for other people as you talk about the future, and you're getting serious, and you're sharing
Yeah.
your vision, and how do we collect that in with one another, or is there separation enough there to where maybe certain relationships dissolve based on
Yeah.
value, meaning, and purpose for the future that's not matching
Yeah.
up with other people. Or maybe we are on the same page, and we're dreaming together, and how do we take those dreams and actually make them something
Mm.
concrete and real with the sun Saturn, especially with that whole Sagittarius moon piece coming in there too, which is Jupiterian
Yeah.
ruled. So I mean, that's just one facet
Yeah.
of all this, but
What
it's many conversations, a lot of things going on here.
What do you think? And I don't know how I feel about this for sure, but it came to me. So say it anyway, since we're dealing with Mercury as a square of the node. So, um, what do you think about the feel of, so if Sun is really representing sense of self, right? And Saturn has a little bit of a serious kind of a little bit feeling of being hard on us, right? So I wonder if a little bit of the adjustment or what's being asked here is kind of to get our own self in line, or really kind of take charge about sort of Where am I at with myself? Where am I putting my energy? What I wanted to say is actually, do you think it's asking us to be a little harder on ourselves in a healthy way? And then with Neptune conjunct Venus, to be a little more understanding, compassionate with others. That is one of the things I'm thinking about how they could play together. And I don't mean that by just letting someone off the hook, but I mean, maybe there's a sense of needing to take a little bit more ownership. Saturn conjunct the sun for myself and have a little more room and grace for other people in my life. And that to me has a bit of a feel, to this energy as well.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I can see that in two different ways. I can see that in the personal sense of like our personal relationships, especially thinking about, Saturn being so strong and the sun being in detriment in Aquarius too. So, kind of standing up against that own individual and there is this kind of giving way, or instability that comes with the consistency of, the sun being able, or the self being able to kind of show up and do this, where we have to lend in the compassion factor and the unconditional love that comes there. And also it made me think of just on a collective level, because maybe there's certain things that the self wants to do that the environment of the collective in this particular moment is a little bit on the harsh side, and we have to we're distanced from what the self wants to express or wants to shine, maybe because of like certain people around the world that are, there's like these bigger stories that are at play in power dynamics, especially with, Jupiter in Aries there, and Pluto getting very close to changing signs. So it could be very personal in the sense, but it could be going through these same motions that are based on just a collective awareness and things that are outside of our control that we navigate with because we're part of this ecosystem of humanity. So it's kind of like all these things at once, but it'd be interesting to speak on once it happens, to kind of just, and that's the beauty of astrology, right? It's like Tara and I could sit here all day and think about like, how's this going to manifest? But, hindsight, good old hindsight 2020. So this is a great learning opportunity to really look at like different dynamics and particular sign combinations, and especially collective energies and these outer planet expressions, and how they actually do manifest. So I know that I will be taking notes. But essentially this is how Aquarius season rolls out. And we that moon in Cap, what do we have? Does Aquarius season roll out with the moon going over Pluto basically? And just just capping things off real nice. It's like let's just conjunct this before we leave. And so I think it ends with basically the moon conjunct Mercury there in Aquarius. So I mean, what are your takeaways on Aquarius season? If my good old questions of, if you had one word to describe with all the complexity, what would it be?
As you can tell, I didn't plan on. I know you ask a word, but I didn't.
You don't have to. It's best not to plan. This is an instinctual something.
For me, I know it's not a typical just Aquarian word, but it's courage. That's what I feel.
I feel that. I mean, we are in Jupiter and Aries territory, and we're only getting deeper in it. So that feels right. I mean, it takes courage to change your life. It takes courage to change your narrative. It takes courage to interact with Uranus.
Takes courage. Moon. Well, yeah, but it also takes courage to be honest with where you're at, right? And that's to me where it has to start, right? So if we're really going to be objective with Aquarius, that's got to apply to ourselves too, and that takes lots of courage. At least for me, it does.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, well, and I feel like that's my word. It came out just saying that. It's just truth. I mean, that's essentially, I feel like maybe honesty, the honest truth, the cold, hard truth.
Yeah, but I know I when you say that, I feel that. And it takes courage to be in that space
Yes,
where you
it
can be
does.
like this. That gets back to the getting real that we talked about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. You have to
Hmm.
have you have to have courage to face the truth. Because if you don't, I mean, you can't escape it. It'll find you.
Yeah.
So why not deal with it now when we are at the point of like all this potential of what can come after this? So there you have it. Face up to it. Look at the truth. Have the courage to deal with your life in this present moment,
Yeah.
because dealing
That's
with it in the
right.
present moment is going to help the future outcomes. Because
Yeah.
the future's only built on the multiples of the present.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. But overall, let's say goodbye to Saturn and Aquarius because we are getting close. So,
Yeah.
consider this the exit party of Saturn in Aquarius and our
Yeah.
celebrations with there. Just so yeah, I'm ready. Get out of there.
Yeah. And how it gets to be the end of a party and you want to make sure that you say your goodbyes or you do whatever you
Yeah.
need to do on the way out. I feel like that's a good advice, right? So like don't skip those steps because otherwise they'll just be like projected some route into your life later. So
Yeah. Yeah, you got to do those social responsibilities. You show
walk
up
around the room.
when
Yeah.
you walk around the room. You wait for their conversation to be over so that you can be in there and respectfully be like,
That's
"Thank
right.
you for your time.
That's right.
I thank you for inviting me."
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, when you say that, that includes to the parts of ourselves that we need to shift and change, right? There's something to be said to circling around with those parts and thanking
Yeah.
them for being there and doing their part. And I think that's part of this too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yep. External parties, internal parties.
Yeah. Nothing's wasted in it,
Yeah.
even if we thought we'd rather not deal with it. It's just,
Mhm.
once again, character building. We are building,
Right.
we're building that
That's
character.
right.
Oh my gosh. Well, Tara, I think we did a bang on treatment of
So
Aquarius
cute.
season
Yeah.
2023. So where can people find you? What do you got going on these days?
Um, well, my website is just taraal.com, TARAAAL.com. Lots of A's in my name. That's where to find me. In my teaching world right now, my biggest thing is I mentioned before that I'm the resident astrologer at Sage Goddess, but Sage Goddess this year, Sage Goddess, we have it's a big metaphysical company, but we do a lot of online education and we have a whole every year we have a new educational program with all kinds of metaphysics. And this year we added a proper astrology class, one every month. And I am co-teaching that with the Sage Goddess. So that's my big, exciting adventure. And that just started this month. So it's called Living Astrology, which I love because I have a technique I work with called living planets first, which is moving planets to the ascendant, which is another conversation. But living astrology, really, I mean, not just talking about it, but experiencing it is something I'm really passionate about. So yeah, that's my big thing for 2023.
That's great. I feel like we were just talking about that, like the whole experiencing the planet. So, if you want
Yeah.
to get into
Yeah.
that living astrology, go check out, is it on the Sage Goddess site? Is that how people
Yeah.
go?
Well,
I'm
yeah,
sure
you
they
could,
can find it through
you could go
you.
to, sagegoddess.com. There'll be a whole section. The whole program's called Living Magic. There's a whole section there. And if you're interested in, where you can reach out to me, but I'm always geeking out on something. So I'm happy to share it.
I love it. Well, of course, I will share Tara's information over on my website at energeticprinciples.com. So you can come on there to find these same links as well. And of course, you can find me on Instagram at energetic principles. And anywhere I'm going to be, it's going to be energetic principles. Google it, you'll get there. You'll find me. Of course, I do personal consultations. So if you are looking to look ahead or want to know more about what this year has in store, or even the next couple months, or natal chart consultations as well, you can reach out for that too. Now, of course, sharing is caring. So if you enjoyed listening to this program or think someone else can benefit from knowing ahead of time how to live in the moment, share, share our program with friends who you think can benefit. Leaving a review where you listen to the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, if you want to leave a comment below to tell us what you think this season has in store, or what you're experiencing in your own life, or any thoughts on Saturn and Aquarius, anything at all. We'd love to hear them. It's always fun to engage and interact with listeners. What else is there? I think that's it. So, Tara, thank you again for joining me on the program. It was definitely a pleasure to host you once more.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everybody for tuning in when you do. Yeah.
Oh. All right, everyone. Well, good luck with Aquarius season. We'll see you on the flip side. And as always, may the stars be with you.